Hi, welcome to the Western Dairy Management Conference, or better yet, welcome to the recap of the AHV presentation on the next frontier in dry cow management as presented at the Western Dairy Management Conference 2025 in the beautiful Reno. What have we done there? Well, you've all heard about Stoplac. You've all heard about the great and uniqueness of the product. I mean, come on, modifying rumen microbiome and thus having an implication on the milk yield and better drying of cows, that's amazing. But where is this unique need in the dairy market? Where is it coming from? What is the history? Why are we drying off cows? And more especially, why is it so unique what we were doing? Well, that were some of the key aspects that were touched upon during the conference. And I'm happy to share that again with you in this intimate setting here at HQ in Zwolle. You know this guy, it's me, I'm presenting. But this is just to demonstrate that I'm legit and that I have actually a reason to explain you something, one or two, about drying off cows. And what you see on the left side is a younger version of me, I would say about a decade ago, explaining how to better dry off cows. Sounds familiar? Well, back at that time, I was doing the research for a pharmaceutical company which was going to bring to market an injectable product that also reduced milk production, reduced milk leakage significantly. So we did our time, we did our research, and on the right side, a little bit more beardy, is again myself doing the research for the patent application and the patent work for our QQ3 molecule, better known as Stoplac. And happy to mention that at this moment, we actually have two patents running, not only on the compound, but also on the compounding, so on the composition, which is quite unique. So, rethinking the dry period, what has 200 years, because that is the latest that we found, or at least the earliest that we found some information about drying off cows. What has it taught us? Well, first of all, we know that the initial discussion dates back from 1802, where two English farmers were discussing whether it was best to dry off or to give Betsy a dry period of 2 weeks or 2 months. So even back then, 2 months was already in the game, but shorter was apparently also not that bad. And it took us all the way to World War II, so 140 years later, to define that no, we need a 60-day dry period. And we needed it for primiparous and multiparous cows. Don't forget, World War II also brought us the introduction of antibiotics. And what else did it bring us? Well, it bring a war effort context. Because, as you know, food was scarce and food supplies were scarce. So milk production was very important. And in the name of the war effort context, they really promoted it milk as the Red Bull for soldiers. So you saw proud farmers and cowgirls on big posters. And also here we have the first introduction of specific breeds advertised for their efficiency and for their American, especially robustness, their strength. So what else changed? As I mentioned, we were looking at efficiency. And so at that time, we were still milking cows by hand, filling buckets, and we were not necessarily measuring well the milk production. But as food was scarce, as it was the main food supply, nutrient resource for the soldiers, we needed to improve and up our production, up the production efficiency, up the production volume. And that's where they said, hey, we need a 60-day dry period because this will optimize the milk production in the next lactation. After that, we've seen multitude of ways of improving the milk production in the next lactation. We've already discussed genetic performance. We also had the introduction of BST. And we know how to improve feed management, the nutrient intake. We could play with daylight. So all this increased milk production significantly. And this brought us all the way where we said in the 1990s, hey, we even have evidence that for multiparous cows, a 30-day dry period length is also still good enough. So, and with good enough, we mean no impact on the milk production capacity in the next lactation, even with or without BST. And at that time, we also introduced blanket dry cow therapy, which means they updated the formulation of antibiotics, going from systematically to intramammary tubes. However, a decade later, the problem was not anymore the increase in production. No, we were raising concerns about antimicrobial resistance, and marketing was pushing BST-free labels. So we try to now reduce the negative impact of this increased milk production or milk production efficacy. And also now the discussion was not anymore necessarily how to improve milk production in the next lactation, but moreover, at the end of the lactation, this cow was still producing a lot of milk. And we needed to protect the udder. We wanted to give the udder some rest and whatnot. Those were the thoughts back then. So we needed new tools. And if we look at the past two and a half decades, what are the new tools that came by? Well, in 2010, they started with the first milk reducers, or to develop the first milk reducers and immune enhancers. They started it. Why? Because they were never able to finish it. And I'll explain that a little bit later. Why is it so hard, this discussion? And why is there so little good validated research on the ideal dry period length? Because in essence, they did all the tests. They did the test, why dry? And in general, what they found out was if you increase the dry period length with 60 days or above 60 days, well, then you will have an increased risk of having a fat cow, and this will give you additional metabolic issues after calving. If you reduce, however, to a minimum, or even if you continue milking them, like they do with goats, continuous milking, okay, you reduce the risk significantly, drastically on any metabolic issues, but you will have a dramatical impact on the milk production in the next lactation. And then they try to find out why. What is so important? Why is this effect so important in the next lactation? Why are these days dry having, where is it coming from? And there were three hypotheses: nutritional, hormonal, and mammary epithelial cell. And with nutritional, they played along. Actually, there was very little difference. Hormonal, very little difference. All the research demonstrates that it is about mammary epithelial cell. And it is three things that we need to do. There needs to be a turnover, a remodeling of the mammary glands, and a renewing. And this just takes time. This takes time, and it takes the time it's needed. And what they found out was for multiparous cows, 30 days is indeed enough. It's the absolute minimum. So let's keep for the time being the 40-45 days. But the research shows you can push it all the way to 30 days. For primiparous, however, they demonstrated the time it takes is 60 days. Why? Because the mammary gland is also still growing of a primiparous cow. So it's not only the turnover, the remodeling and the renewing, but it's also still growing. And if you don't allow a heifer her 60 days, they demonstrated this will impact your milk yield in the next lactation with up to 20%. So that's definitely no-go. So please don't see the dry period as a rest, but see it as a reset. The udder is not slowing down, it's not resetting. No, it's powering up for the next lactation. And if you would look closely to the dry period length, you see the active involution being at the moment you stop milking the cow, milk is still piling up and it's actually needed because you need the stressor to stop the milk production. And then you have the milk reabsorption. This on average takes 3.5 weeks. And then in the last phase is the 2 weeks prior to calving, we see the udder expansion. Colostrum is being made and the udder is again filling up. And then you have the very small time in between. And this is the completely involuted phase. Actually, at this moment, the immunity in the cow's udder is maximized. And that is, in fact, the true resting periods. So, mammary epithelial cell, that's the key. The number and the proliferation activity. So, the renewing, remodeling. That's what it's about. That is what determines the exact amount of days needed. And when I was talking about nutrition, nutrition is not the same as dry matter intake. This is a little jump that I want to make just to demonstrate to you the importance about drying off a cow. It's not only the length we've determined, 60 days for heifers, 45 minimum 30 days, but let's keep the 45 for the multiparous cows. Perfect. Nutrition. Why are we emphasizing abrupt dry off so hard? Because we're not only introducing a new product with Stop Lack, we introduce a better way to dry off cows. A better way, why? Because if a lot of farms today, they will reduce the nutrient intake, they will reduce feed consumption in the cows to try to modulate them to produce less milk. This doesn't work. It's demonstrated over and over again. Why? Because drying off a cow, it's the choice, it's the decision even of the farmer. Cow doesn't want it. The cow is metabolically programmed to produce milk, genetically selected to produce milk. So giving her less feed, less nutrition, what do you think? She will say, okay, I will produce a little bit less today. No, she will take on her own reserves. She will mobilize her own fat and protein reserves to try to uphold that production that she is genetically capable of. So what you will have, in fact, is a cow that is already experiencing some form of subclinical hypocalcemia, hypomagnesium, hypophosphatemia. Even ketosis would be on the chart if you push your cow and if you actually punish her by giving her less feed than she needs for the milk production she wants to produce. And what they also saw, and that is what is very well explained here, is if you're going to decrease the the nutrient availability, this will eventually lead to a reduction in dry matter intake. And this reduction in dry matter intake will have a minimal impact on your milk yield, but it will have a lingering effect during or on the course of the dry period. And this is, of course, the opposite of what you want. You don't want your cows eating less and having consumed less dry matter during the dry period, but because even in this graph, they very well showed it from Iowa State, nice research. They very well showed that the reduction in dry matter intake continues all the way up to calving and even after that. So the cows that you will reduce the feed consumption prior to dry off are more at risk for metabolic disease at calving after calving. So definitely don't do that. Even if you don't dry off your cows with Stop Lack, do abrupt dry off. Fundamental. So recommendations, strategic implications of the dry period. What have we learned so far? Tailor the dry period to parity to optimize production and the next lactation. Abrupt dry off because we want the highest dry matter intake as possible for that cow, especially during the dry period where she will indeed already have consume a dry cow ration. But especially because we want to maximize dry matter intake at calving and then after calving for the best start of the next lactation. 35, 40 days multiparas. Okay, not getting into that. I made my point. So that's what research has shown us so far. Is that the end? No, that's not the end. Because as I said, the past 2 decades, we were not so concerned about increasing milk production anymore. We are more concerned about the cow that is producing too much milk at the end of the lactation. And what you see here is a very good demonstration of this. Why? Because this is a study comparing the keratin plug formation. The keratin plug, it's like a button that is being formed at the teat base and is forming a barrier between the outside world and the inside mammary epithelial gland. And what you see here is cows, they call it the high producers, the ones that are dried off at 21 kg. We just call that a regular cow nowadays. But they saw that the ones that produced 21 kgs at the moment of dry off, so in 24 hours, daily production, let's say, well, even in the 3.5 weeks into this active reabsorption phase, active involution phase, even after this time period, still 50%, half, had open teat ends, which means there is direct contact possible between the outside environmental world, environmental bacteria, and the inside mammary gland. That's not good. So even considering if you have a cow that still produces 40 kgs of milk and we are able to reduce 50% of that milk production thanks to stuff like she's still at the 21 kgs. Of course, the other will be fine. She will not expand too much. She's capable to handle that. There will be less milk leakage, but probably the keratin plug formation is still not completely good. So there are still open teat ends, which will lead to the potential for new infections. What you see here are the actual new intramammary infections that occur during the lactation cycle. And what you see here are two peak moments. The first peak moment is right after the dry off of the cow. So, which means in the first days after the dry period or after drying off a cow, the risk of occurring a new intramammary infection is at the highest. Again, why? Well, we know that the sum or the peak of milk leakage is at day 2, and so on and so forth. Then during the 3.5 weeks, there is involution, immunity rises, less opportunity for bacteria to cause an infection, immunity of the cow getting better, all the way up to calving. At calving, again, a new stress moment, immunity goes down, and the colostrum goes up. So this is an ideal nutrient resource also for bacteria. They sense that the cow is not feeling too chipperish because she's focused on calving, immunity down, energy down. Ideal moment to give an infection. Moreover, we know, and that is in the next graph, very interesting work of Bradley. What he did was he investigated the origin of the new intramammary infections, of the new mastitis cases in the next lactation. And what he found out was that 2/3 of the new infections in the first 2 months, apologies, 2/3 of those infections actually find their origin in the dry period, which means this open teat cells, bacteria enter. Maybe the immunity of the cow is high enough, bacteria go into biofilm, and so into the new lactation, there they will cause havoc and they will cause a new intramammary infections. And this explains also very well the benefit of giving those cows an extra tablet at day 7. That will already prevent a tremendous amount of these cases. Why? Because at day 7, the cow will still be able, she's not at peak production yet, she will still be able to maybe clean out the udder and remove some of that pathogenic or mastitis causing bacteria. Bringing that all together, you combine those 3 graphs, you come to the 4th graph, demonstrating to you very well the risk period of having a new intramammary infection in the next lactation, being at its highest in the active involution phase. And that is exactly where Stoplac is focusing on. Tools over the years. How did we come to this product of Stoplac, and what has happened before? Well, first of all, the most conventional treatment that is already very known to the dairy farmers is let's dry tube them. Let's put broad spectrum antibiotics in those teats and hope all goes well. Now, there is plenty of academic research demonstrating the efficacy or the inefficiency of these kinds of treatments, but hell, we did it. We see it as an insurance. Don't change a winning team. The only thing is that team is not winning. Apologies. So this is just the evolutions of the antibiotics, but let's agree we use intramammary antibiotics. Then came around the year 2000, right around the time that we started having some remarks on the general antibiotic usage. Internal teat sealants came to the market. A very coincidence with the timing. I still blame marketing. But in fact, we had an internal teat seal. Sorry. They did, however, need to introduce it twice. Because in 2003 or 2006, 2003, they introduced Seal, but too many dead cows. Something to do with the mode of application or what was written on the SPC, took it off the market, reintroduced it, and now it has been very common to use an internal teat sealant. Of course, please note or observe that the internal teat sealant is not protecting the udder from the moment of application. Why? Because the teat canal is still open, very subtle. So even if you put in an internal teat sealant, milk leakage can still occur. And if milk can go out, I assure you bacteria can go in. So for this period of time, those first 2-3 days, the external teat sealant came to market. Also around the same time. External teat sealants, a lot has happened, but also a lot have remained the same, because even in the external teat sealant, they used to put antibiotics. Now, that was 2003, the reintroduction in 2009. And then in 2016, something very new happened. Velactis, which was the product that I was also responsible for launching, came to market, cabergoline. And Velactis, the idea was you inject the cow at the moment of dry off, you inhibit prolactin secretion temporarily, and if the cow is not in an environment where she is pushed to produce milk, Pavlov reflex, meaning she's not next to the milking parlor, that cow will have a smooth dry off. Unfortunately, it was banned from the European market because of too many dead cows. Why? Was it the product? No, it was not the product. Product works brilliantly, still available in the Latin American market. The issue was that people use this product on a cow that they try to reduce the milk. So instead of implementing this routinely in an abrupt dry off protocol and optimize all the gains you can have from a welfare perspective, animal continues eating, no hunger. From a management perspective, no additional labor, no weird milkings, extra handlings. And from an economical perspective, just having the full benefit of that lactation and not reducing any milk yield. Instead of doing that, stubbornness, as we all are, they put a brake on the cow. They punish her by reducing the nutrient intake in that cow. The cow still gives too much. Why? As I explained earlier, it's not in the nature of the cow to just say, oh, you only feed me for 5 kgs of milk. I will only produce 5 kg of milk. No. So these cows were in a hypocalcemic situation. You then give Velactis, and a side effect of Velactis was that you had a temporary reduction in uptake of calcium by the gastrointestinal tract. Very unfortunate, but this meant that the cows, day after dry off, went down. And if you didn't recognize milk fever, which of course people didn't easily recognize, and you don't give her additional calcium, well, that cow is done for. And they had 24 of these cases, and then the European Union said, no go. Another interesting product was Imrestor. from Elanco. Very difficult name, but what it did, the active component, was actually potentialize, improve the efficiency of neutrophils, of the white blood cells. The protocol was a bit difficult, but the idea was nice. What we wanted to do was a cow at the moment of calving has a stress moment. We know these infections, these opportunistic infections that are going to arise at the beginning of the lactation. Well, if we can prove the immunity of the udder at the moment of calving, we can probably reduce the incidences of subclinical and probably clinical mastitis cases. However, Imrestor had a detrimental impact, or detrimental is maybe a little bit exaggerated, but it had a negative impact on the milk yield. So they discontinued this product. But as you see here, it is thus very important, and it's worth investing a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of your effort in promoting a product that has a beneficial effect or impact at the moment of dry off and at the moment of calving. And dear ladies and gentlemen, dear AHV Toriers, that is exactly what we have in our hands with Stoplac. But unfortunately, before going into depth in Stoplac, just FYI, some insights about the internal teat sealers. Actually, basically what this says was internal teat sealers, they are very nice, but they're hard to give. They have their effect in the teat canal, not in the cisterne, not way up there. And actually the mode of application is quite difficult. On the other hand, if your farmer is able to do a very aseptical insertion of a internal teat sealer, and even if you put a pinch on it for 15 minutes, which is actually the best mode of application, then your product remains where it should be. It doesn't go up the other, and 2 weeks later, you still 2 weeks later into lactation, you don't still find stuff coming out. Exactly that is the reason why farmers that produce milk for cheddar cheese are not allowed to use internal teat sealers, because they don't want that heavy metal, or that heavy metal has some implications in the making of the cheese. But that's a different story. About external sealers, what happened in the last 20 years? Unfortunately, nothing. An external teat sealer, they just added some xanthane gum to make it thicker, and they want a vivid color. Well, that's just rubbish, because the more thicker your external teat sealer is, or teat barrier is, the more easily it cracks. And if it cracks, well, bacteria can enter again. Moreover, there is very little to no scientific research except that one that was published in the Journal of Dairy Science. And fortunately enough, I was the one presenting this protocol to Ghent University and asked Sophie Piepers to do this. This was for a previous company where we introduced an external teat barrier. And I said, what does a barrier need to do? Well, it needs to protect outside bacteria from penetrating inside. And I'm very happy to say that T-Hex Dry with the antibiotic, and this one was the only one that was actually worth doing it. With AHV, we also looked into external teat sealers. However, there is a very logistical issue, especially if they're flammable. Okay. I explained already a little bit about this milk leakage. Milk leakage seems to be very important. Well, yes, it is one of the main drivers for increased risk of an infection. But so by reducing that, you already optimize your dry periods. But what is another way to evaluate your dry periods? Well, that's looking at the somatic cell count dynamics, SCC dynamics. So what we are going to do, we are going to assess the dry period, and we're going to look at the threshold of 200,000 cells. In the first situation, you have a healthy cow, so a cow with a cell count below 200,000, going into the dry period, and if she comes out with a cell count below 200,000, we call her healthy. Nice. Second situation is the situation that we want to achieve with the dry period, meaning a cow with a high somatic cell count, goes into the dry period, comes out with a low. Why? We call that cured. Interestingly enough, we even have a cutoff value. The KPI of number of cows that we want to have cured should be above 80%. On the contrary, this happens as well. We want to minimize that as much as possible, but that are cows that go in the dry period with a low somatic cell count and come out high. This is what we call new intramammary infection. KPI, 10%. So we want to have the amount of cows that increase their somatic cell count below 10%. And of course, in the last situation, those are your chronic ones, high in, high out, and the dry period doesn't seem to have any effect, beneficial effect on the other health. So again, KPIs, new IMI, less than 10%, cure rate, higher than 80%. But I must admit, in all my years of research, going on farms, investigating other health, I still have to find the first farm that can achieve these KPIs. However, I'm already happy to say, I know it comes next, but with Stoplac, we do see an improvement on these KPIs. Finally, the moment is there, introducing our research and our innovation from AHV. But before I dive into the Stoplac, I already see the color, but I know the next slide, I was introducing AHV. Would be very hard to imagine that internally I still have to introduce it, but just for you to share, FYI, how do I introduce AHV to the people that don't know it? Well, based on our research in ruminants, what I can say is we want to optimize lifetime production. How do we do that? Well, all the products are, of course, feed additives. They go into the rumen gastrointestinal tract. That is where they have their effect, and they influence the different organs. For us, the main important organs, liver, other and uterine. And what we do with our products, with our protocols, of course, we have quorum sensing inhibition, meaning a diminution of virulence factors, improving tempering the formation of biofilm. We focus a lot on energy and metabolism. Why? Because the immunity needs it. Of course, we do immune modulation and stress relief, and we want to protect the liver health. Nice. Dairy Global, that is showing the impact of what you can do with even an active other health protocol. You can increase lifetime production with 0.71 years. That's already demonstrated and published in the Dairy Global article that came out in June 2024. If you want to translate that increase in lifetime production, it is actually a reduction with the involuntary cull rate by 4.3%, which actually means for the farmers having to keep or having to reproduce less heifers. And I know for the US situation, heifers is like a scarce commodity nowadays. This is to prove or to demonstrate that even before we had a tool or a new tool like Stoplac, we were already considering how our proactive other health program could improve the dry cow period. And what you see here is actually the work of Nicole Keohana. She is a PhD student from Ireland, and she followed up 5 dairy farms, Irish dairy farms, over the course of 2 years, where she did selective dry-off treatment. So the AHV cows got the proactive udder health program, which means, among others, the extra 2 months prior to dry-off. At dry-off, no antibiotics, and then 7 days after calving, again, the proactive udder health program compared to cows getting the antibiotic and teat sealant treatment, regardless of somatic cell count. So even cows with a high somatic cell count, but that were in the AHV group, did not receive any antibiotics at the moment of dry-off. And the beneficial effect of that was, in fact, that compared to the antibiotic teat sealant treatment group, we saw no different in the cell count dynamics. Moreover, the AHV group showed a little bit more milk production. But most importantly, what we saw was a dramatic reduction of new intramammary infections. So this already demonstrates that we can perfectly dry off cows without antibiotics and just putting them in the proactive udder health program. And this has no negative impact on milk yield, milk composition, somatic cell count, and has a positive impact on new intramammary infections. Moreover, we were able to demonstrate that or part of this trial demonstrated that the cows that were in the AHV group after 2 years mid-lactation, they didn't found any Staphylococcus aureus anymore. And this work should be published by the end of the year. So happy to inform you when it arrives. Moment suprême, where we all been waiting for. The introduction of Stoplac, or at least to demonstrate you how we introduced Stoplac at Reno, the first in class dry off facilitator. So Stoplac is an oral feed additive. You give 4 tablets per cow, you use it at dry off, and you improve management. Why? Abrupt dry off. You improve udder health. Why? We have a direct impact on milk production, and we reduce by that milk leakage and thus the entering of new bacteria, and we increase animal welfare. Less udder engorgement, less cow discomfort after dry off. And this was truly marking the start of the next lactation. Why? The improvements you see here are the direct improvements at the moment of dry off, but we also saw indirect improvements at the moment of calving. So the direct improvements is the milk drop. What you see on the left side was the first study done by the University of Utrecht in 2021. That's how long we've already been working on Stoplac, demonstrating a reduction in milk production by more than 50%. On the right side, you see at the end of the dry period, different products that call themselves dry off facilitators or stopping milk production. Well, in fact, we tried those feed additives in lactating dairy cows to see if there was any effect on the milk production. And happy to say that the only product that moves the milk lactation curve or the milk yield curve is Stoplac. So I don't know how the other products claim to work. I do know of some, but they do not reduce milk. Less udder engorgement, less udder pressure, increased cow comfort. This resulted also in less milk leakage, which, as I mentioned, reduces the the penetration of environmental bacteria. That's what we've done. But we also had a CRO doing a contract research organization doing our work. And what we wanted them to demonstrate was that the product was safe and to explain to us if we could put the finger on why we see benefits for the cows in the next lactation. Because the benefits were not only at the moment of dry off, we even saw improvements in the next lactation. Please explain us why. So what they did on a very tight protocol, they looked for blood and milk biomarkers and see what changed. So prior to dry off, 3 days into the dry period, 40 days into the dry period, and after calving, they took blood and milk samples. Yes, milk samples as well. It was not easy. And they looked for different biomarkers and the ones that are of interest for us. And first of all, they were able to say, hey, your udder health at dry off is very interesting. Cows that are treated with Stoplac have a lower pH in the udder, not in the rumen, in the udder, and lower lactose, which means that there is actually a better availability for the immune cells to function, and this also creates a less favorable environment for especially mastitis-causing bacteria. Nice, quick win. Then we needed to be sure that it was safe. We did the blood work, it's safe, it's perfect. But as I mentioned before, AHV has its products that work through the rumen, through the gastrointestinal tract. So do we tamper with the rumen? Is the rumen healthy? And one of the very important biomarkers is vitamin B12 for rumen health. And what you see here is that actually at the moment of dry off, you see some movement, but there is no change in the movement between the treated cows and the control cows, which means that Stoplac itself, the use of this product, how it has its effect on the rumen, but it doesn't affect rumen health. Very important. And then we start with the itty fun part. And the fun part is what we saw at calving. And what you see here is already the next slide on the right, the lowering NIFAS. In other words, especially if you would put the NIFAS above cortisol, what you would see is that the Stoplac cows are breaking down less fat and still building up more fat compared to the control cows, which means they are less at risk for ketosis. Next up, we saw CPK values, creatine phosphokinase, a biomarker for muscle degeneration. As you know, cows in the first 2-3 weeks in lactation, they move around 30, 40, 50 kgs of protein. This is their own body condition or body reserves that they are mobilizing. We see less muscle damage in cows with stop-lac. And so they keep their condition better, which is an important metabolic health biomarker. And what we also saw was that the calcium levels were higher in the stop-lac group, which for us is very beneficial because this will also mean that there is less risk, or we reduce the risk of hypocalcemia, milk fever. And of course, we better dry them off, but do we also see a better start? Yes. In fact, very interesting. The stop-lac cows, it was not much, but they tended to start the first 5, 6, 7 days a little bit slower. Even up to 20 days, we saw that the line was a little bit below par. But if you look over 40, 60, 80 days, we see that they go over the top. What does that mean, or what is the good implication of this? Is that actually farmers are reluctant to completely milk out a cow or to take out all the colostrum because they believe that otherwise she will peak too soon, and this will again have an negative impact on metabolic health. But it's in fact very good to completely milk out your cow and to take out all the colostrum out of that first milking. This will reduce again your risk on new intramammary infection, reduce the somatic cell count in the beginning of the lactation, and thus cows that are treated with stop-lac, you can perfectly do this without fearing that they will peak too hard because metabolic health, the metabolic condition is optimized. And this was also the comment of Léonard Theron, which is the investigator of the CRO Rumexpert with whom we are working, and said, wow, this is some of the best results we've ever seen in the last 10 years, including VMP. Think Phylactis, think Imrestor. And happy to say that we created of this phase 1 research a very nice poster that will be presented next week at the European Pediatric Congress in France. Yeah, by now, sorry, this slide is a little bit outdated. Happy to tell you that already more than 28,000 cows have been enrolled or are prone to be dried off with stop-lac, which for us is of course I would even say a celebration, cause for celebration, because we truly believe in the potential of this product, and we see we are getting there, and we're getting the message across. There still be some farmers that will be reluctant to do as we say, but in all the farms of the 880 farms that we are now currently working with, we know that they are appreciative of the efforts that we are making, not by only introducing them a new protocol, a new product, but also by helping them dry better, by explaining the abrupt dry off, by demonstrating the impact on the second transition phase at calving. And that's why we introduced with a lot of success, not only stop-lac, but actually stop-lac in the proactive approach. So all new clients start with stop-lac, B-SLAM-B, and even an extra at day 7, especially if you explain them the benefits of working pro health, because this will allow them to achieve the peak, the genetic peak optimum of their cows. And if you have a little bit data, if you have a little bit of sense of what is potentially possible on your farm, and knowing that with the AHV proactive protocol, starting with stop-lac, this is achievable, well, I assure you, you will get the benefit of the doubt, and you can do a trial 4 or 5 months, half of the cows, do it with the farmer, you'll convince them, they'll see the results. Last but not least, I'm just showing some of the preliminary data. Please just see this as inspirational, because these data is outdated. I know your André Rigo will soon present you the full outline, but this was just to show you, yes, there is already a lot of data available from USA farms, USA dairies, and we see the things we want to see, meaning we see a reduction of culling rates, a reduction of abortions, or at least not a negative impact, because initially that's what you're looking for. Yes, indeed, the occurrence of milk leakage is dramatically lower, not zero, dramatically lower with the stop-lack cows, the bolus cows. We see a reduction in the 60-day culling. Okay, perfect. 60-day dead already. Nice. This was a trial that we did in the Benelux, just explaining same farms. So 20 farms. We dry off cows, conventional or stop-lack. And we're just going to see what are the dynamics. Happy to tell you that there are more healthy, less new IMI, more cured and less chronic cows in the stop-lack group, knowingly that the comparison is the cows on the own farm. So this is just indicational. This is not pure rocket science with a significance factor, but we don't care. We just want to see the trends. And happy to tell you that with the CRO that is presenting the work of the phase 1 in next week in France, we are actually at this moment already starting at phase 2, which is a way larger trial over a period of months in 4 different countries, 20 different farms, where we will compare all these good stuff that I just presented to you, but by a third party, where we can have validation, where we can have a very nice publication, and maybe in the meantime, try to maybe win some innovation awards, put AHV again on the map, having a new way to explain what we can achieve with quorum sensing and influencing the rumen microbiome. All new ways to introduce stop-lack. And last but not least, it's maybe not all the way up to me to tell this, but I'm also happy to introduce with you. We discussed this today with marketing. They did a telemarketing campaign where they called up old clients that stopped with AHV, presenting them this new product. And I'm very happy to tell you that the outcome of this internal let's call it trial, has been so positive that we will continue, at least at headquarters, with this approach. Why AHV stop-lack? Well, it's a unique dry-off facilitator that reduces milk production and thus milk leakage and promotes management, udder health and welfare, not only at the moment of dry-off, but especially also at the moment of calving. So it's a unique way to reduce milk production and to optimize metabolic health. And that's why if you want to talk proactive, if you want to see proactive at its best, well, that would be stop-lack. Thank you very much for your attention. Hope you enjoyed the podcast or the webinar. Thank you very much. See you soon.